Okay, I'll call to order the special regional council meeting of May 8th. Please be advised that today's meeting is being recorded and streamed on a publicly accessible website. Council additions. Any council additions? CAO additions.
Just one, Mayor, regarding the letter to the province regarding BC Parks.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda, please? Moved by Councillor Andrews, seconded by?
Dolan.
Seconded by Councillor Dolan. All those in favor? Carried. Reports, bylaws, admin report number 33, 2020, operation of regional parks for decision. Mr. Barry.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll take this and then Harv can jump in whenever. So based on council's direction and previous discussions, there's been a lot of research done in the background and by a number of staff just to navigate through this one with the ever-changing information that's out there from the province. And as we were drafting this information, we had the Premier make announcements about the restart plan and what that looked like, which was changing our course a little bit also in terms of what we were doing, and additionally, of course, trying to understand what BC Parks was doing in terms of their plan for opening, and also what the processes were. So a lot of information, a lot of research, a lot of calls, a lot of discussions, a lot of follow-up, sometimes more questions and answers, but we finally were able to get what you see in front of you regarding the two campgrounds being Andy Bailey and Tetsa River. A summary of the information basically is if council wishes to operate or open the two campgrounds, then the option we're looking to, if that's the case, to have a reservation system only. That'll help us manage the flows in and out of the campgrounds, have an understanding the amount of people within the campgrounds. As was previously communicated prior, we can have more than 50 people in the campground, but can't have more than a 50-person gathering in any given area. So kind of two components to it. One is understanding the amount of people and reservations within the campground, and then on top of that, understanding or having to needing to potentially monitor what the day use looks like and how that's spread out through the two campgrounds. Additionally, you'll see in the report the amount of signage that we would want to obviously put in place relating to the current pandemic. Recommending all the COVID recommendations that are currently in play and the restrictions that are existing. Sanitation levels regarding both campsites. So in conversation with BC Parks has looked at have a process where they look at either parks being undeveloped or moderately developed or developed. To give you examples, the Bucking Horse Provincial Park would be, or campground would be an undeveloped campground. The Muncho Lake or Summit Lake parks would be a moderately developed campground, and Hot Springs would be a developed campground. Within those areas, BC Parks, our discussions with them, they've indicated that if it's an undeveloped campground, the sanitation frequency for those campgrounds, i.e. Bucking Horse, will remain the same. And if it's developed moderately or developed, they would increase what's existing in the contract, possibly looking like doubling what's in the existing contracts. What we did is we took a similar approach and looked at Andy Bailey as potentially being an undeveloped campground, and looked at most likely maintaining the existing sanitation program that we have in place, and then at Tetsa looking at a daily sanitation program for the pit toilets, pumps, and things like that. Again, with that being said, there could possibly be opportunities or a necessity to increase those frequencies based on moving forward. We have had discussions with the local health officer to get some guidance and direction and recommendations and requirements So we're all generally on the same page, but given there are some unknowns moving forward, it's difficult to look at previous data for the campgrounds. For example, considering that going into the May long weekend, and if council were to open these two campgrounds prior to the May long week, and then there's an expectation that there's going to be an increased pressure on the two campgrounds based on the fact that the BC Park campgrounds won't be open. So looking at data, previous data, typically TETS in the long weekend is usually sold out anyway, and all the campsites are full. It's quite busy, and Andy Bailey could be busy, but likelihood that it'll be a bit busier. So there are some unknowns moving forward. We're prepared to monitor and take a look and see what that is. It could be a chance that as staff we come back and provide some more information for council and outline that maybe increased frequencies are required, and additionally possibly increased costs. Some other things within the in the report outline the recommendation that obviously garbage are put in the proper receptacles, and the any recyclables are taken by the campers themselves, as we want to have the recycling bins open there just due to the current pandemic and some of the precautions we have in place. Additionally, we're part of this, we would look at the potential, and we're working through that now, that there might be a couple of sites closed at TETSA, probably upwards of 4 based on proximity. So that's going to be investigated a little further. And then of course, Andy Bailey, with the layout of the way the camping's the setup is there currently, we would actually delineate the campers there with most likely using concrete barriers so that it clearly defines camping spaces in the areas, again, to meet some of the requirements around distancing and things of that nature. That generally covers it. There's some information here, obviously, in terms of what BC Parks has provided in terms of information relating to the provincial parks and the campgrounds and what it looks like they might be doing. As we reached out to them yesterday also to get some clarification. And it looks like as of May 14th, the parks will be open, not the campgrounds, but the parks. So i.e. Stone Mountain Provincial Park will be open, but Summit Lake Provincial Park will not be open for, Summit Lake Campground will not be open for day use. So it means you could walk to Flowering Springs. You can't access the Summit Lake Park. They have indicated that there's a potential that those parks will be opening, and the campgrounds for camping will be open in June, with the exception of the hot springs, of the hot springs, just due to.
Any questions, councillors?
Yeah, I have one question, please.
Go ahead.
So it's around the playgrounds. I was reading the notes that Valerie sent out with the Minister Robinson meeting that you guys had on Thursday. And the notes said that Minister Robinson had said that there was never guidance to close playgrounds, and that she advised to open playgrounds regionally. So I'm bringing this up now because there's a playground within the TETSA River campground. So is that accurate information? And if so, how are we dealing with that?
Councillor Goering, we're dealing with it like we've dealt with many pieces of communication we've received as staff and as an organization through this pandemic. It was brought up as part of the discussion yesterday in Minister Robinson's call and the address and her address, and the concern was that I'm going to say all, if not the majority, of local governments have closed playgrounds and associated things related to playgrounds, if it's basketball courts, tennis courts, et cetera, based on not direction of the province, but based on direction around multi-touch, common touch areas and restricting common touch areas. So even though the province hasn't directed municipalities to shut playgrounds down, there was a high recommendation to restrict common touch areas, including playgrounds and things of that nature. And that's the reason why they're down. The request that's come from a lot of local governments now back to the province has been looking for guidance on how to reopen. So the recommendation from us as staff would be that we continue to keep them closed until we get some guidance on how to open them. And Minister Robinson has taken that back to the staff to hopefully provide us some guidance, because at this point, based on the information we receive, if you have them open, increased sanitation would be required, and what does that look like, and what can we do or not do? It's similar to we were delayed with this report. We had a very difficult time to get an understanding of the frequency and how we deal with the pit toilets, because the original information received from the province was specific to public toilets, and there was an extreme frequency requirement for public washrooms, possibly 2 to 4 hours, or every 2 to 4 hours, which would have created extreme costs to be able to perform that task at both campgrounds, especially Andy Bailey, where we do not have a camp attendant at this point. It wasn't until yesterday, after being able to communicate with provincial parks, that because we did reach out to them earlier in the week and last week to see if because we made some assumptions that they were preparing guidelines and guidance to reopen. We didn't think they would necessarily share draft information, but we were hoping to get some information from them, and it wasn't until yesterday that they were able to communicate what they're doing regarding their opening plan and what frequencies look like. And additionally, then we did get some feedback and information back from our local health officer, indicating that the pit toilets at the campgrounds wouldn't be requiring the same level of sanitation as a public washroom, as obviously we're talking apples and oranges. So still some challenges there. We would recommend at this point, given the amount of potential, especially going to the long weekend, the amount of people that we would expect to see camping at that campground, that we would still restrict the areas that have the potential for common touch areas, being the cook shack and playgrounds. And then we are in the background, we're currently evaluating and trying to get some guidance from the province on what that looks like.
Ms. McIver.
I was also going to mention that in the conversation with our regional BC Parks rep yesterday, the suggestion was made that the province may not open all playgrounds and all campgrounds. So there may remain, and likely in our area, the continued closure of playgrounds, specifically within parks. And that's just for the feasibility of adequately sanitizing those high-touch surfaces. And then she also recognized that there are going to be some high-touch surfaces in some areas that can't be sanitized, but where those exist, for example, handrails at viewing platforms, they're just doing a lot of prominent signage and transferring or informing the public that it is their responsibility to keep themselves safe, and kind of that use at your own risk messaging across the board. So in terms of what to do about the Tetsa River Playground, I think we would be in line with what Parks is doing, at least at this early stage in the game of reopening parks, that if we were to keep it closed for that, under those principles, it wouldn't be outside of what Parks is also doing.
Thank you. And thank the staff for, go ahead.
Sorry, so just to confirm then, with the recommendations within the report, we're talking about like opening, but not the playground or the cook shack, right? At Tetsa.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, yeah, good, thanks.
Okay, well, I want to thank staff for doing this, and I know that this is a moving target, and you get some answers, and then when you start to ask more questions, they run away, and things change, and it's like trying to hit a moving target here all the time. I guess I've got a couple of questions here. One of them is, what's the financial impact of doing this to the municipality? Do we have any visibility on that at all?
We're looking at this point to, if Andy Bailey, approximately upwards of $3,000 to $4,000 for re-and-reing the cement barriers down at Andy Bailey. We're still reaching out to the contractor at Tetsa River regarding some enhanced sanitation to get an understanding what that looks like. The current contract, as it says in the reports, it's just over $10,000 plus a percentage of the fees that are collected for the campground. So the increased sanitation is still something that we're discussing. That the contractor actually resides up in the area and has access to the campground, frequent access. So we're confirming that. So we'll see some increase, but don't have a number there yet. And then additionally, with the staff attending Andy Bailey for the existing cleaning frequency, that's already built into the existing budget because we already, right now we look at the existing frequency and then potential for some additional monitoring, which we don't really know what that looks like for moving forward because we're still working through some of that. So there will be some increased costs potentially in the neighborhood. I mean, initially I'm going to think minimally about $5,000, but again, it's in its infancy and it could increase.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Penny? No?
Just a little comment on that. So we may increase a little bit of cost in these two parks, but probably offset by what we're saving on the rec center currently, maybe?
Yeah, I don't know for sure, Councillor Penny. The savings. I mean, we've obviously realized savings based on the budget at the rec center, and there's no indication, obviously, that we're going to fire the rec center up on May 15th, being next Friday. So every week after that, we're looking at that $60,000 to $70,000 savings on top of what we've already communicated to the council. So no concerns around being able to fit it in the existing budget within the rec facility. The campground budget has a potential to be overshot a little bit in terms of the expenses for the campground. On the flip side, there's a potential chance too where people are staying closer to home that we might see an increase in revenues compared to previous too. So that will offset some of those expenses at the campground. Mm-hmm. And then additionally, the savings in terms of the overall budget for the rec center, recreation budget, it'll fit within that with no concerns there at all.
Thank you. I suppose with the new introductions of regulations around June 1st, we maybe also be looking at opening the rec center around that time as well. But I'm sure there's going to be challenges with that as well.
Yeah, to be honest, I mean, we don't know what that looks like right now. The information that we received this week, I mean, the information's been pouring in from the province since the announcement by the premier. One thing that we would need to do with the rec center, which is a requirement from WorkSafe BC, is we would need to put together an operation plan that would meet all the criteria and restrictions that WorkSafe is actually developing currently. So a lot of stuff, the ink hasn't even dried yet, and some of the new policy and processes that are being developed. So a significant amount of work is required and will be required prior to the opening of the rec center, just in preparation of opening that facility to meet the restrictions that are being put in place. So June 1st would be a challenge, even if we tried to hit the go button today, based on the amount of safe operating procedures and things, and the fact that no different than the process we just followed with the campgrounds. Probably more questions as we solve something. We develop, one issue gets solved, two more questions and issues develop.
So in the conversation with Minister Robinson, that was part of what was some of the mayors from around the district had said, was that their rec centers were closed, their rec facilities, whether they were rec centers or skateboard parks, were closed, and they wanted some guidance around the reopening of them. Minister Robinson said, well, we weren't the ones who closed your rec center, and it was pointed out, no, you weren't, but that municipalities that had closed the rec center that wanted to open them up, they wanted some guidance and some guidelines. And it is not just for municipalities, but also for restaurants and dentistry and all those things that are opened up. These people are looking to the provincial governments for some guidance on how do they open up, what can they do, what can't they do. And this was a a piece that was slower being rolled out by the provincial government. So at any rate, getting back to our discussions here, is there any more comments here on the campgrounds? Very well.
I'd like to
You
make
have
the
a
motion
motion,
that we,
Mr. Penny.
I'd like to make the motion that we go ahead and follow the recommendations from staff in opening up these campgrounds and rec facilities.
Do you have a date on that, Councillor Penny?
What date do you think that we would need to set, Mr. Barry, to adequately get ready for it?
If council gave the approval or go ahead today, what we're targeting based on the work that required just to get things started to meet the right restrictions, we would target next Thursday being the 14th of May. If council wished to have it open prior to the meeting on weekend.
So Councillor Penny, are you making all four recommendations? Is there any discussion on that, or do I have a seconder?
And I would set the date then for the 14th. I'd like to see it open before May long weekend for sure.
And I would second that.
Very well. We have a mover, Councillor Penny, a seconder, Councillor Gerwing. Is there any other discussion on this? Mr. Barry? Very well. I'll ask for a vote then, please, on the motion. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Mr. Barry?
Additionally, there was discussions by council prior, and it's regarding restricting the campground at this point anyway to residents that or people that reside within the boundaries of the Northern Rockies municipality. So I wasn't sure if that's something that council still wished to proceed with. Or...
We're working on the reservation system, right? Both campgrounds will only be available via reservations?
Yeah, it'll be reservations and a prepayment because we want to restrict the exchange of cash and the like at the campground. So it'll be a reservation system. You're required to reserve and only, and then of course a prepayment. What we'll be doing is having signs posted at both entrances of the campsites, letting people know that if they're pulling in, that they can only basically access or camp if they already have a reservation. There's no drop-ins, no ability to camp overnight if they don't have a reservation already, and additionally to prevent potential drop-ins. Also, the highway signage, and this will be communicated to people to reserve. The highway signage will actually always say no vacancy at this point, so that people don't see that there's a vacancy, the campground's open, and they can just think they can drop in.
Mike, I had a more I thought about that, about restricting it to locals, is we have so many locals right now that they still consider themselves locals even though they're working outside of town, and
yeah,
and I would fear that, you know, some people trying to come home for the long weekend would be restricted. So it's a really, really tough decision for me to make.
yeah. I think I feel exactly the same way. I would really hate to restrict somebody that used to live here that's coming up. Like, I think that we can provide a safe service and meet our end goals with the reservation system. That we're not.
Any other comments, councillors?
That we don't restrict, but we don't restrict who reserves a spot, but we are only reservations only.
That was the motion, Councillor Gerwing, then. Do I have a seconder for that motion?
Councillor Dolan?
Moved by Councillor Gerwing, seconded by Councillor Dolan. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Mr. Barry, your addition to the agenda, the letter.
Yes, Mayor. So at the last council meeting, council passed a resolution to draft a letter to go to the province regarding the BC parks and the concerns that the BC parks were opening. Since then, we had the Premier's announcement on Wednesday, part of the restart, and the fact that BC parks will do a bit of phased approach, which includes opening parks for day use, and then possible opening of campgrounds on June 1st for overnight camping. So considering that this has already been announced, just wondering if council still wishes to have something drafted, or if you would like to pass a resolution to not draft that letter now. There is a letter that is drafted, but is not necessarily appropriate based on the announcements that have come out.
I think the circumstances have moved past that letter, and I think there's no longer a reason to send that letter out unless we want to draft something different, which would be a different letter. So, I'll make the motion that we don't send the letter. Do we have a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Souls. All those in favor? Carried.
Thank you, Mayor.
I'll ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting then.
Make that motion.
Moved by Councillor Penny, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care, everybody. See you.